Okay, so we're just going to quickly introduce all the speakers, just in case you've forgotten who they are, of course. Obviously not, there's quite a lot of characters here. On the end, we have Peter Knight. He did the talk about the West Kennet Long Barrow yesterday morning. Next to Peter is Lucy Wyatt, the author of Approaching Chaos. And we have Alan Butler, who did the talk about the ancient metrology and Thornborough-Henge. Semir Osmanagich, Bosnian pyramids discoverer. Mr. Temple, of course. Howard Crowhurst, the Brittany expert, and on the end here, John Major Jenkins, the 2012 Mayan scholar. And of course, we have John Martineau, who's going to be hosting the forum, and I'm going to be the microphone monkey running around. So, over to you, John.
Great. Okay, Flor, I'm sure you've got lots of questions for these erudite souls. Who's got a question? Any subject, first takers?
Actually, before that happens,
yeah.
Howard has something to say.
Howard has something to say.
Oh, have I?
Yeah.
He's not coming up. He wants.
I'd just like to correct something that Robert said in his speech, which wasn't quite true. No, Robert was talking about Masura in Morocco, and he said that there were 168 stones, but there used to be 170 or something.
Well, that's speculation.
That was speculation. I was just pointing out that 168 is a very important number because it's the number of hours in a week. It's 24 times 7, and it's a number we find very often in Karnak in the measurements and also in Egypt. So probably there were only 168 from the word go. So they're probably all still there.
There's only 168 Bosnians in the world.
In your world.
And they all throb at 28,000 times a second.
Good. The lights are on. First question. Anyone got a question for anyone on the speakers?
Right, that's it. We'll go on.
Yeah, can I just say that I've really enjoyed this conference, first time I've been, and first time to Glastonbury, so thank you very much for everyone's what they put on here. I just wondered about pyramids on other planets, perhaps, Martian genesis, things taken, photographs taken from Mars and different planets, and structures seeming to conform to sacred geometry. If anyone has any understanding or any more information regarding that.
Right. The face on Mars, who wants to go? The pyramids on Mars.
Who's from Mars here? Lucy. Is it women are from Mars or Venus? Oh, that's why you like girls so much, because you're so interested in what the Venus is doing at 5 or...
I go to Mars every night. I visit and Venus.
8 times a night?
8 times a night. Great. Right.
Does anybody say that?
Pyramids on Mars.
I think we've been stumped by the first.
We might have been
question.
stumped. Would you like to offer us some of your thoughts on the subject you've been thinking about it?
John, I've got a quick update there.
Yep.
Wayne Herschel from Cape Town, Hidden Records. He's published some very good pictures in his book, which are of NASA. And even though NASA don't make a big deal about it because they obviously know they're looking at something that is not natural, the pictures from NASA are very revealing.
Right.
So if you go to Wayne's site, the Hidden Records, you can get an update on that.
Sorry, I sort of made light of the earlier question. I will say something about Mars, because I think that was John, I can't see, but I think that was John Agnew who just said that. I think I recognize your voice. I do know something I can say about Mars. I was a friend of Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, and he was very friendly with the people at NASA, and they gave him photos, which he showed me, showing trees growing on Mars, which were taken from a very low orbiting satellite, and these were these not angiosperm type trees, they were gymnosperms, that means conifer type trees, and they were growing in clumps of like little copses. And there's no doubt, I saw several of these pictures, that there are bushes and conifer type of trees, not many of them, but just occasional clumps of them growing on the surface of Mars, and that NASA have known this for many years and have not let the public know about it. So it's not just a matter of bacteria on Mars and ice and water on Mars, and they do know that there's vast quantities of water beneath the surface, and so we can be absolutely sure there is still some life on Mars. Therefore, we made a bit of a joke about it, but we can't say for certain that there aren't structures on Mars from earlier intelligent life forms before Mars became essentially uninhabitable. It's just that nobody knows. There are these photos that different people interpret that way, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But if anybody knew, they wouldn't tell us, because if NASA's not going to tell us there are trees there, they're certainly not going to admit that there are pyramids or anything else there. I know that there are trees on Mars because I've seen the pictures, and Arthur, who I knew for many years, I trusted him completely that these were the real thing, and that his friends at NASA said, look at this, Arthur, here are some pictures of some trees on Mars. We've got this low-level satellite going around Mars, which may, for all we know, be one of the satellites that was claimed to have been lost contact with, you know, that maybe wasn't, that was really taking these pictures close up of the surface. But there are trees on Mars, and so that means if there are trees, and we're not being told, there could be anything on Mars, and we certainly wouldn't be told.
I've seen the photos.
Have you?
Yeah.
Who's that?
Carrie, I just interviewed you.
Oh, Carrie, yeah. We can't see, by the way, anybody.
No, I've seen the photographs. They look just like trees. No, I didn't want to steal the show here. I just want to verify that you are talking correctly. The photos do exist. I've seen them. And actually, I can't reveal, but they're going to go public. And they're actually on the net if you look far enough. And so Arthur C. Clarke is absolutely a great person to get a referral from. He would tell you the truth.
Well, that's fascinating, Carrie. Can you give us a web address to see the pictures?
They're not on my website, but we have testimony from whistleblowers all about Mars. So, you know, I do encourage you to go to my website.
Do you go beyond trees, Carrie?
ProjectCamelot.org. The photographs.
Stand up.
The photographs, I believe they're on the web. I'd have to search for them. If I can find them, I'll be happy to send them to you.
Your whistleblowers about Mars, do they talk about anything more exotic than trees?
There is water under the surface. There are also what appear to be high-speed tunnel system close to the surface of Mars. Gordon Neville and other people have seen the photographs. I'll tell you this. Is this publicized? I mean, are we on the recording? Okay, I can't tell you that. I thought if it was just a closed room, then it could be a rumor, but if I'm
Turn the
being...
camera off. Turn the camera off.
I'm sure we can close for 10
I'll
seconds.
tell you in the bar.
Sorry, anyone watching.
So when you go, yeah.
Well, thanks for confirming that, Carrie. That's very brave of you.
Hi, yeah, I think for me personally, there's a more pressing issue closer to home rather than is there life on Mars. Is there life in the House of Lords? Great. Well, that was fascinating. There certainly used to be vast amounts of water on Mars because all of the canyons and everything are all formed by water. It used to have a much larger atmosphere than it's had now. Lost its atmosphere due to the fact that it's quite small. There wasn't enough gravity to keep the atmosphere there. So there are theories that life might have evolved on Mars first and then ended up here. And they do find large amounts of or specks of Martian rock at on the ice at the poles. Next question. That was fascinating. Who's got another good one?
Yeah, this is for Semir. There was a phrase that you used during the presentation that made me question how careful you are about your sharing of information, where you said that if this means that this could generate free energy, it would be a free society. That's a pretty dangerous admission, or you understand the point that I'm coming from. How protective are you of these forces that would prevent this information from coming to light?
Well, I'm here. This project not only that changed the history of humanity, but it has the potential to change the future of humanity. We were the first one who detected the energy beam, who measured them with our instruments. We know of 3 types of energy that this pyramid is generating. That focused energy beam that's coming through the pyramid. The second one is the energy flow within the pyramid. And the third one is the energy that goes off the pyramid, affecting the crops. And probably it was affecting the society in the distant past. So obviously the builders of the pyramids, they knew how to satisfy their energy needs. With the underground labyrinth, free of negative radiations, they were able to make the safest place, the place for the regeneration, for revitalization. So the idea that the Egyptian pyramids or any others were used as a tombs does not make much sense. You don't build such huge structures for one dead man. But it makes much more sense to build such structures for generations of living people. Now, when you ask about the threats and things like that, all our lives is the fight between the light and the dark. And they've been attacking us in different ways, behind the scene, in front of the scene, in the media. They've been doing all the steps not to issue the permits, to cut the funds, to boycott us in media, not to give us a link to the UNESCO and things like that. Despite everything, we continue because we have the noble goal in front of us. And the truth will come on the surface. And finally, when I said the energy, the free energy, people obviously knew that the shapes are very important, the structures, it's not just the structure, this is the energy machine. When you have the free energy, you have a base for free society. Everything we do in Bosnia is based on such a view. Free society, no selection of information. It's open for everyone. So we are doing, our part. We are doing the best example that we can.
Thanks, Semir. That was fascinating. Would any of the other speakers like to comment on the idea of relationship between architecture and as yet unrecognised energies in the megalithic scenario?
I'm not talking about pyramids in this case, but it's something that came up in conversation earlier today. I was asked some years ago now by a friend who is now deceased. He had a beautiful garden on the northeast coast in a place called Filey, and he dearly wanted to have a stone circle. So he'd managed to get some stones which had been used in a stone circle up on the North Yorkshire moors in a place which had now been given over to forestry, so the stones had been removed. So we marked it all out in a megalithic way and built the stone circle just to see what would happen. And you were talking about energy gravitating out sideways. The most remarkable thing that happened was that within a year there was about 5 or 6 years worth of growth in the plants immediately surrounding the stone circle, and this was something which I'd not ever even read about or heard about before, but I don't think anybody would have doubted that something quite strange was going on there. And it made me wonder, and it's a line of research I've never looked up or thought about, if this might have been part of the reason why stone circles were placed where they were, because of course we're talking about the first farming cultures, so they needed all the help they could get. Maybe that's the case.
Yeah. well, I don't have to build my own megalithic monuments because I've got loads in Brittany, so I can test them on real ones. But what I'd like to say is this winter solstice this year, I was with a retired engineer from the French railway system who came with a lot of equipment, and he had a machine measuring negative ions, and it was just before sunrise at winter solstice, and we've managed to get the monument which is called La Table des Marchands. It's the dolmen which is just near the massive gras, broken standing stone, the one that weighs 350 tons, and there's a chambered dolmen just near there. I don't call them tombs, right? There's a chambered dolmen just near there, and it's by the sea. It's a lot of fresh air, and he measured the negative ions outside the chamber and got a reading of I can't remember the number of zeros, but it was I think 50,000. Is that a reasonable figure? And when you go into confined areas, the number of negative ions in general goes down. And once inside the monument, he got 4 million negative ions reading off on his machine. Now that is totally contrary to any other readings he'd ever done anywhere else. Going into it's a small confined area, and finding such a high reading of negative ions was something, he's still not sleeping about that information. And another thing happened when I was filming in the Gavrenis chamber. We were sitting in the dark waiting for the sun to come up to film the sun's first ray at winter solstice as it comes down into the chamber. And I was with a professional film crew, and they'd placed 6 fully charged batteries on the stone floor. The floor of the chamber is one massive stone. They'd placed 6 fully charged batteries on the floor, and we were sitting in the dark, and he was waiting there was somebody on the top of the monument who was going to shout when the first beams started coming over the horizon so that he could put his camera on. As we were sitting there, suddenly the assistant said, "The LED lights on the batteries have come on." And so we all looked at these LED, and the batteries, which were just placed on the stone floor, all the LED lights were alight. And at that particular moment, the first red glow hit the stone in the chamber. And so he hadn't put the camera on because we were all looking at the LED light. So he had to come back the next day and do it all again because we missed the first shot. And so when he tried to use those batteries, which they'd charged up on their professional battery chargers all night, they were totally discharged. So that shows what sort of energy things are going on inside those monuments at specific instants. That happened at the instant that the sun's first rays at winter solstice came down into the chamber. All those batteries lit up, right? And from that moment on, that was the first day of a week's filming, and those guys have been pulling my leg about these monuments, saying, and from that moment on, they then had a totally different attitude about what the megalithic monuments could be about.
I just wanted to say that when Semir was talking about the Bosnian pyramids, I was thinking that the same ingredients must be present in most pyramids. I mean, particularly Giza, because you've got chambers underneath, you've got water, the Osirian shaft. So it would be very interesting to do some tests and see what the ions are there, because I don't think it's unique, probably, to the Bosnian thing.
It's not related to the ions, but one interesting thing we discovered in Egypt when we were doing all that dating at Giza was the fantastically strong radiation, gamma radiation coming out of the granite. And we discovered that the granite sarcophagi emitted so much gamma radiation that the mummified bodies inside would have been irradiated to the point where all bacteria would have been killed. And this would have aided the preservation of the mummies. And I suppose the Egyptians must have discovered this somehow, which would be why they used so many granite sarcophagi. But of course, this would not happen with alabaster or limestone. And we discovered that the Valley Temple, which is largely constructed of granite, was so intensely radioactive that any priest working there for 20 years would unquestionably have developed leukemia or some other form of cancer. There's actually really very powerfully radioactive, the Valley Temple.
Well, as long as we're on this topic, I do recall I spoke 5, 6, 7 years ago at the conferences on precession and ancient knowledge, and there was an amazing researcher there named Chris Burke who had done experiments at the Maya temples, and he was specifically interested in the places, the sacred spots, the altar spots, which of course are kind of the hot spots where the ceremonies were done. And he had a device that measured, I don't know if it was capacitance or some kind of enhanced electromagnetic energy, you know, and so he would go right to the spots, like the altar spots, and he found that these spots usually had a much higher degree of this energy going on there. And as a kind of a secondary test, he had with him little petri dishes with seeds, and he would leave them there for a few days, and they would always sprout very quickly, much more quickly than any other spot. So it's hard to say whether the energy increase is something that's embedded in that spot for all time, or if it's something that develops over time because of the ceremonies that are done there, or maybe a little bit of both. And you know, the Maya temples are sort of places of sacred energy, you might say, and people feel that some of these temples are sort of energetically closed and they need to be opened up again. You know, that's some of the work that's being done. The Maya are still around, and they do like to go around and do their ceremonies at certain spots. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing. I just thought I'd share that.
That's great, thank you. And of course, Paul Devereux also established that background cosmic radiation in stone circles, particularly the Rollrights and Dragon Project, ran an extensive experiment there and found that the background cosmic radiation dropped to zero at dusk and at dawn, the moment when the sun was on the horizon. Some sort of similar effect. Great, next question.
Can you come back for a moment to that question about the radiation in a lot of the Egyptian structures?
So, the microphone coming.
It just occurred to me when you were talking about the radiation in a lot of the Egyptian structures. Do you think the wands of Horus had anything to do with protecting the practitioners during the ceremonies? And if they weren't doing that, do you have any idea what the wands of Horus were actually for?
That's a good question.
The wands of Horus, you don't mean his harpoon that he...
No, right. There's a researcher who's done some work with them. It's Ivanov. There's an interview with him on Project Camelot. But they are the two scroll-like objects that you see a lot of the pharaohs and a lot of the priests actually carrying, but the pharaohs in particular. And yes, I'm sorry I didn't make that clear, that they've been given the name by this researcher of the wands of Horus. But you know, there are two instruments almost the size of this microphone. You see very often on many inscriptions and many depictions of the pharaohs that they're standing there carrying one of each, these things in one in each hand. I wonder if you have any indication.
I'm sorry to let you down. I don't really know about that. Does anybody else know? It's a pity Gigal's not here. I bet she could have answered it.
he's standing, he's got not quite even this big. And they just look like two cylinders in his hand. He's standing down like that. Sometimes there's hieroglyphics or a cartouche on the end of them. I think, is that what you're on about?
Yes.
What, little cylinders?
Yeah, small. I would say if you held them in your hand, they project at about two inches above the end of your fist.
Like the raffle that they have.
No, it's not like a sistrum. No.
Well, I must confess, I'm very unobservant. I've never noticed these. I wish I knew more.
Right. I think Robert clearly needs to go back to university, I think.
More point of information. Ramses II in the Temple of Luxor, his enclosure, I don't know how many, there's about 16 or 17 statues of them. They each have those in each hand. That's in the Temple of Luxor. If you're down there, you know, that's what they're talking about.
Is he grasping them in a kind of aggressive way, like he's sort of a smiting pharaoh type?
No, he's just holding them in his hands like that. You know what you call it? That?
We can't see you up here. Show me again. I've got my hand up.
Okay.
What?
Like that. He's like that. He's got his foot forward about 18 degrees, 70 degrees, and he's holding them in his hands like that. And there's a cartouche on each end. This is in the Temple of Luxor.
This is clearly going to be the subject of Robert's next book.
Ideally, yeah, for filmmaking.
I'm sorry, I can't add anything. It's fascinating. I will look for these.
Well done, questioner. We have a stumped panel, always good. Next question, please.
This is a question for Alan, really. I wanted to ask about the pendulums, because I was recently in Shetland. And I was looking at some of the mysterious stone objects that they have in some of the museums there. Some of the kind of large, almost weight-like objects. And I was looking at one that was a cube, particularly, that I actually got to hold at the Tomb of the Eagles, which seemed to be worn down by a rope on each side and could potentially have been used as a pendulum. I was wondering if that had occurred to you, or if you had any thoughts about that.
Yes, indeed it has, and over the years, Chris and I, both individually and together, have seen many objects which could easily have been pendulum weights, but the problem is we're thwarted by the fact that archaeologists always term these things as being loom weights, and they could indeed be loom weights. You know, when they strung the looms, the downward strands were weighted at the bottom, and so it's very difficult, because the pendulum is such a very, very simple device.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to know whether these things were pendulum weights or loom weights or both.
Yeah.
You know, perhaps when the priest wanted to carry out the experiment for the megalithic yard, he went in and borrowed one of his wife's loom weights.
I imagine that they may have been sort of sacred objects.
Yes, yes, without wishing to appear flippant, I think you are probably correct. But if you find one that's cube-shaped, for example, you know, one would think that one would not go to a great amount of trouble to make something as purely domestic as a loom weight. And if it's got a hole through the middle, and if it's got marks and has had ropes.
Well, it looked like it had been smoothed on each side. It could well have been tied.
Yes,
you know.
I would imagine that the actual weights themselves, but it's pure conjecture, may have been kept for generations, because, as you say, I think they would have taken on a deeply ceremonial importance.
Yeah.
But the trouble with archaeology, of course, is it's all a matter of numbers. You only find things when there's been a lot of things. And probably there were always very few of these ceremonial pendulum weights. We may have found them, we may not have. But whatever happens, the archaeologists will always call them loom weights.
Sure, because I have a friend up in Shetland who's a sculptor, and he often goes out to the quarries up there, and they're old Neolithic quarries. You know, they've found stuff from the Neolithic in these quarries that they know is from the Neolithic. But he's often found objects that he's gone to the museum with, and he's been told that they're fishing weights, but it's highly unlikely that you get a fishing weight in a quarry inland, isn't it?
Yes, net weights is the other one, isn't it?
Yeah, but they look, I mean, I've seen a couple of them, and they look very much like a beautiful axe head with a hole through the top of it, you know.
I don't know how many of you may be familiar with Keith Critchlow's book, Time Stands Still. I saw a copy for sale by Roma down in the bookshop. May still be there. He reproduces photos that he took of some early stone-carved platonic solids. When you mentioned a cube, it reminded me of that. I recommend this to everyone's attention, that this is one of Keith's extraordinary finds, which he reports in that book. As far as pendulums go, I don't know anything about British pendulums, but I do know that Petrie made a very fundamental discovery about the use of the pendulum in a very advanced sense by the ancient Egyptians, and he reports that in a magazine that he edited for a long time called Ancient Egypt. I have a complete set of that, and I came across this because I went through the whole set, and I found this extraordinary report about Egyptian pendulums, which I don't think anyone alive today is really aware of, because nobody really looks at that journal very much. And it was amazing to me. I wish I could tell you which issue it was in and so on. I can only tell you that he made some fabulous discoveries about the ancient Egyptians using pendulums to some amazing rate, which he believed was connected with the computation of the calendar. I can't give you the reference, but I did mark it so I could find it for you if you're really keen. But there was definitely a use of pendulums going on in antiquity.
Just further to that, it doesn't really surprise me, because there was an association, I think, between the Sumerian culture and the Egyptian culture as far as geometry and mathematics was concerned. And although I couldn't mention it in the talk yesterday, we did a lot of work, particularly on the Sumerians, and we're absolutely certain that they used pendulums as well. They were using a more orthodox geometry, the 360 geometry, and the pendulum that they used was what we would now call a seconds pendulum, about 1 meter long. So we ought to be finding pendulum weights everywhere.
Yeah, I know a lot of these stones in question are often found to be perforated, you know, so you can hang them from something, hence the pendulum theory. But some of the archaeologists who'd re-examined some of the bones from West Kennet, and I discussed this, have actually said that there might be also a type of musical instrument, not necessarily a flute or anything like that, but just for, and a person I know, a postgrad, I know up north, has done some replicas of these from West Kennet, exact replicas, and she said that when you blow into the hole, they give you this real ear-piercing pitch. And we know that flutes were around in the Neolithic. And also one of my other friends who deals with ancient instruments, who makes replicas of them, he too has got these ox toe bones, similar to West Kennet, and he's put a string through them and then swung them round like the Australians do. And he says they make this most weird sound. So, yeah, so whether it's swinging around or producing this high-pitched sound, a lot of them were found in West Kennet, so perhaps they were making some sort of sound either to change their consciousness or else to summon the ancestors. So there's another possible use, the acoustic use of perforated stones.
I just wanted to mention, as well as pendulums, the plumb bob, of course, which is the surveyor's instrument, and you can see examples of that in the museum at Luxor, and I've seen them in the museum in Delhi to do with the Indus Valley civilization. So that's another use of thing which is either a pendulum that swings or a thing that drops and causes a straight line for the surveyor.
Yes. Great. Has anyone got another question?
Yes, I wanted to back up a little bit to the radioactivity and these energies out of pyramids. Regarding the use of granite in particular, if it's high in potassium feldspars, you're going to have some radioactivity coming off of potassium. That may be one source. You might need a lot of granite in order to achieve that. But in particular, I'm interested in the energies and these negative ions. And I'm curious about where significant pyramid structures are constructed around the world. At Giza, I believe they're built on limestone, if I'm right there. And of course, the Salisbury Plain, we have chalk, calcium oxides. So calcium carbonates, calcium oxides, if it's possible that as a source of cations, that may be one reason why these significant structures are being built. And then in Bosnia, we have a lot of concrete being placed on top of them as a carbonaceous material, carbonates and so forth. If there's a relationship there geographically and in terms of the materials that are being used to achieve whatever ends were intended for these pyramids. So it's just, and possibly even in North America. So I'm just curious, going through, if you're aware of pyramid structures, you're working with them, if you know about the base geology that they're associated with.
Yeah, would anyone in the panel like to comment on the relationship between ancient sites and underlying geology?
You know, Semir mentioned Joseph Davidovits, to whom he took his sample, and he said it was a geopolymeric concrete. I've been involved for about 12 years now with Joseph in developing modern geopolymers. And we've had, obviously, countless discussions about archaeology, which is his other great interest. That's how I met him originally. And he has a theory, as probably many of you know, that the pyramids at Giza and the large pyramids at Dashur and so on, the early pyramids, were not built of cut stone, but were built of cast stone. And, well, actually concrete. And if you do X-ray diffraction analysis, you can't tell the difference because they're both limestone. So you can't differentiate them in that sense. It's very hard to tell the difference. It does explain how the pyramids could be constructed by people who had no cranes. If they were cut stones, how did they lift them if they had no cranes? And if they were cast, that's easy because you carry limestone rubble and water up to where you've got your wooden frame. You mix it in there. It polymerizes and it takes 3 hours to go hard. And then you pour the next one on top, which would explain why you often can't fit a razor blade between the stones. And a natural exudation of a very, very thin layer of gypsum takes place between them. It's incredibly thin. It looks like it might have been mortar, but it isn't because it comes out of the polymerized blocks. And Joseph has actually proved this technology because he has cast a 4-ton block and a 3-ton block, and they have gone hard, and I've seen them. He had to do it in France where he lives, so he didn't have the benefit of the intense sun of Egypt. But this is the technology which I believe was used to build the pyramids. And so he is certainly the world's expert on Roman cements and ancient concretes, as Semir says. And there's a tremendous resistance among Egyptologists to accepting this incredibly simple solution to the problem, for the reason that the Egyptologists do not like to admit that the pyramids exist. They go to Egypt and they don't look at them. They turn away, and because they're too big and they're too big a problem. And I've heard them say, we don't concern ourselves with pyramids. When I was younger and more naive than I am now, which is saying a lot, I used to ask Egyptologists about the pyramids, and they would actually say to me, we don't concern ourselves with the pyramids. And I've actually heard them say to me, they're too big, and we don't know what to say about them, and we don't know about pyramids, we're not engineers and so on. We do our digging, or we do our tombs, or we do our texts. That's it. And most Egyptologists, you can't get them to say anything about the pyramids.
Robert, the question was, it was very interesting, but the question was to do with the relationship between sites and the underlying geology on which they're built. I mean, it's very...
I'm sorry that I didn't carry through, but when Joseph talks about the casting, the whole point is that the limestone from which the blocks are cast comes from the same plateau. In other words, they're using the plateau to make the structures on top of the plateau at Giza. They are made of cast blocks of Giza limestone rubble. The casing stones were different, but the main blocks were made of the plateau itself. That's my point that I meant to make.
Thank you.
To answer your question, pyramids in Peru are built from the adobe bricks. In Bolivia, granite. Guatemala, Salvador, volcanic stone. Egypt, limestone, granite. China, sandstone, granite. Bosnia, sandstone and concrete from the conglomerate. Different materials, different results, but the same shape. The shape of geometry produces certain energy results. In our case, the Bosnian pyramids of the sun and the moon are built from different materials. Concrete on the sun, sandstone on the moon. Below both pyramids, we have artificial water accumulation. The geometry of the pyramid causes that the water becomes healing water, but with the different properties, like mineral water today. One has more calcium, the other one more magnesium, but they are both good. Now, we know that under the dragon pyramid, the third one, that formed perfect equilateral triangle, we have another water accumulation. So, you have equilateral triangle, the question is, what is in the middle? Right now, we are guessing, we have not proved that. We think that there is a place, maybe artificial lake, where all three water meets, which is supercharged water. So that's just a guess. But like I said, different materials produces different energy properties and different energy results.
Hi, this isn't a particular one about the pyramids, but you're asking about alternate materials, different materials being used, and of course where I mainly work with Stonehenge, Avebury, of course it's mainly all chalk under there, which is an organic rock. It's made out of minute sea creatures originally, so you could say it's a living rock. And of course the sarsen stones, which are used at Stonehenge and Avebury and at West Kennet, are actually made out of quartz. They're actually a sandstone, and when I was looking for this kind of organic-inorganic mix, I thought, oh, it was sandstone, and I thought, but when you look at the sarsens, it's a sandstone with a difference. It's only officially a sandstone, but we always think of the sarsens as limestone, really. They just have that limestone look to them, don't they? But they're actually made out of minute grains of quartz. If you look at a sarsen stone close up, you'll see virtually the whole stone is twinkly little bit of quartz. So when you're interacting with these stones at Stonehenge or Avebury, or when they took them into West Kennet, you're more or less standing in front of and interacting with a big quartz crystal, in effect. It's just that it's made out of little tiny granules that have been naturally cemented together. So, of course, we know the vibrating qualities of quartz, and quartz crystals. So, and I think the ancients knew that they can, these things can be set to vibrate with certain pitches, certain sound. Sound. The latest research on sound, you can make things vibrate if you just hit the right pitch. And I think the ancients knew that there's no such thing as a solid object. Well, the newest newest thing I know to a solid object is what's between George W. Bush's ears. But oh, is that a vacuum? I don't know. Anyway, but that's 0 point, is it? Okay. Sorry, George. But yes, so I think the ancients knew about that, knew about the qualities of quartz, and that's one of the reasons they incorporated them in West Kennet personally. But I think it's also one of the reasons could be that they brought the stones from the Preseli Mountains to Stonehenge, because they've also got big chunks of quartz in them as well. And diorite, all sorts of magical things. Yeah, so I think there's a definite relationship between energies and what you want to do with them. And also, if you remember the slide on my talk, I had about the different layering at West Kennet. So you've got, the spine of sarsens, which is inorganic, then you've got the quartz, the chalk, which is organic. And certainly we've taken electrical smog equipment into West Kennet, the things that you can tell if you've got leaky radiation or electricity coming out of your plugs. And we stand at the entrance, and the local masts are all setting this fog meter going up, beep, 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 and the masts are miles away, but it's picking them up. And as soon as you go into the chamber, the detector goes totally quiet. So I think we know from West Kennet and in the pyramids, energy can be accumulated in these places, but I think sometimes this covering is to keep the outside world out, to create a quiet, still place for perhaps other stuff to come through from other dimensions.
Have you noticed how frequently, when you're in the vicinity of one of these monuments, cell phones won't work at all?
cameras.
And cameras. Yes, I've had a digital camera fail completely. And that wasn't inside one. I could understand with a cell phone if you're inside such a structure, but even in the vicinity of them, it's sometimes enough.
There was a chap over here who mentioned that there would be radiation coming out of potassium feldspar. I can't see you, but could you elaborate?
Well, potassium is naturally...
Microphone.
Potassium is radioactive.
You're referring to rhyolite, then?
Potassium anywhere you find potassium. So if a lava of rhyolite contains potassium, it will be radioactive. Depends on how much potassium it contains. As to and how contained the airspace is as to what level of radiation you would encounter in that space. So when reading your book and thinking about the little nooks and crannies you were going into and the possibility of higher radiation levels, I thought, well, if this is dead airspace and no one's been in there and they've been locked up for a while, you may have high radiation levels. And if one were to open a door, insert a sarcophagus, shut the door, the radiation level picks up, just like you'll have high radon levels potentially wherever you have Precambrian rock and you build your house on top of that, and that's where your radon levels are going to go through the roof. So.
Yeah, they can be quite good for you, those energies as well. Where I used to live in Wales, we had ridiculously high radon levels, and I had these, all my pets lived to an incredible age, which was very strange. My dog lived to 20, my cat lived to 20. They were really strange, and they were kind of big. The cat's big. No, big cats normally die young, you know. So.
One head?
Yep.
One head on the cat?
One head. Yeah, one head. Yeah, very good head as well. Excellent head. And the dog was extra intelligent. It was one of those dogs that looked at you and tried to work out what you were thinking and knew when you were coming home. You know. Right.
Do you mind if I say a word?
Yeah, Howard.
I'd just like to talk about a megalithic site which is very, very little known. It's called, in French, La Chambre des Bondons. It's in a department, the least populated department of France, called Lozère, which is north of the Tarn Valley. And there are 7-meter-high megaliths there. It's 1,200 meters above sea level. It's under thick snow all through the winter. And why I'm talking about it is the megaliths are in granite and the ground is limestone. So all those megaliths have been taken from granite quarries, which are at least, the closest is about 8 kilometers away. And they've been carried onto this limestone plateau and erected on the limestone plateau, which means that any bit of granite you find lying around is the remains of a standing stone.
Does anyone like to speculate on what on that? This is Wilhelm Reich's work on the relationship between different kinds of rock, and in fact, most long barrows in southern England, interestingly, are built on the juncture between the chalk and the green sand. The chalk green sand boundary forms a wriggly line across southern Britain. Most of the long barrows are all on that line. It's almost like where the organic meets the inorganic. There's a specific something created that Reich called orgone energy. And sorry, Robert, I interrupted.
No, it's on. Fascinating. I'll just add a detail about the Valley Temple again. It's constructed of a mixture of red granite and what appears to be Egyptian alabaster. But in fact, I mentioned briefly when I was speaking earlier that I found stalactites in the Sphinx Temple. There are large boulders, and I took samples of those. It looked like pretty strange alabaster to me, and I took them to the Natural History Museum in London and to the mineralogist guy that I had taken lots of things to, because I used to bring a lot of gems back from China and things, minerals. And so he thought that I gave him this. I said, now tell me what this is. He assumed it was from China, like all the other stuff I was always showing him. And he said, well, it's a stalactite. I said, are you absolutely certain of that? Well, of course, I'm a mineralogist at the Natural History Museum. I said, well, that's very interesting. Where do you think it comes from? Well, you haven't told me. I suppose it must come from China, like your other things. I said, no, it comes from Egypt. And I found it at an archaeological site at Giza. Well, and I said there were absolutely huge boulder, and there's several of them sitting in the floor of a temple. And he said, well, then they are from a cave. Now think about this. This is the place under which we have huge hollowed out spaces from the limestone, and there are stalactites, enormous chunks of them, sitting on the floor of that temple, and the excavators never noticed them, and they were too heavy to move. They probably took the smaller bits away, but the huge boulders, they couldn't shift, so they just left them sitting there where they are now. And so they are from a cave. Well, I suggest that the cave is under the temple. I showed you the entrances to it. And this brings us to another important point, which is that what we think of as the alabaster that constitutes about half of the lining, of the internal lining of the Valley Temple, is probably not alabaster that's brought from an alabaster mine, but it's probably made of this material from the hollowed out spaces beneath. So in other words, what we think of as granite and alabaster, which are joined together, and so that you have walls which are alabaster below, granite above, or the other way around, very striking red and white effect, that in fact it's not alabaster, it's stalactites from the caves beneath. And I take this further. I have a strange piece of stone mounted on a bit of wood in brass that's clearly Victorian, which says casing stone fragment from the Great Pyramid. And some traveler collected that and had it mounted. And it's not just a normal limestone casing stone piece. It is clearly also another piece of stalactite, and yet it's said to have been part of the casing of the Great Pyramid. So maybe the casing stones of the Great Pyramid were also carved from the very same stalactites, which is why they were so white and shining.
So, the theme of Megalithomania is what were the ancients up to? So, there's obviously some relationship between these underground things and fault lines and rocks and everything. But would the panel care to just sort of finally paint their colours to the wall and tell us what they think, why are they doing this? What's the reason for it? Is it just aesthetics, or why go to all the trouble?
What were the ancients up to?
Yeah.
Well, that's a big question. I think they were delving deeper into the mysteries, really, and trying to figure out the big picture. I guess I always think of the ancient Maya anyway as trying to integrate all the different domains of human experience into kind of a grand universal equation or something like that. I think that they were open to the essential mystery of life. You know, they were open to that, but they were also practicing their relationship to the larger universe. You know, they were recognizing that they were interdependent with the cycles in the sky and the geological processes going on around them and the seasons, and they just sought to express this grand cosmic vision in the way that they oriented their temples and built their megalithic structures. And you know, it was just a practice that was showing that they were living in synchronization with the entire universe all around them. So
you don't have to. It's not compulsory. You don't have to look at me like that. It's okay.
What are the moderns up to?
Yeah. What
are the moderns up to? That's the question I'm wondering. And who were the ancients? I mean, were they all the same? Were all these people identical, you know, all these ancient people? Or were there different sorts of ancient people? Were there sort of elites or more intelligent? Did people have different
Prevaricating. You're prevaricating, Howard.
Sorry.
What were the ancient Bretoniques up to?
Well, because we hear about peasant farmers, agricultural societies, and then you hear about sort of enormous 5 billion ton pyramids sending off energy into space. And that's not really, are these the same ancients who were developing agriculture and making experiments with things? What I would say is that as far as Karnak's concerned, I don't think there's any experimentation going on. I think there was some incredibly advanced scientific knowledge which we know nothing about and which was totally developed, and I think we desperately, as moderns, have to try and understand what it was. So I'd say, what are we up to? Why aren't we going down these underground chambers? Why aren't we spending all our time trying to come into contact with some incredible science which just disappeared from our history? That's what I'd ask.
Well, I certainly agree with that. My God. And the progress you've made in reconstructing the science underlying Karnak is mind-blowing. And the problem is, how do we get them to even look at it? The opinion formers who are going to influence the greater public refuse to take cognizance of all these findings. One reason is because it's too difficult for them, but I'll stop prevaricating, I'll answer too. Otherwise John will get rough on me.
Yep,
won't you, John?
yep, I will. Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah. And now that you've turned into such a great philosopher and I threaten to sit at your feet.
It'll get you nowhere.
No, it's not going to work. Being serious, which I know is very difficult for me, the Egyptians, to go back to them again, honored above all the principles of what they called Ma'at, which means cosmic order. And the gods were all facets of that. I read somewhere recently that if you go to St. Peter's at the Vatican, in Rome, not at Vatican, and you look at the great arcade around that central courtyard where people stand and look at the Pope. There are 178 statues there, I believe that's the number, not 168, so they got it wrong, didn't they? Of saints.
10% extra.
Yeah, that's sort of like the air in the spare mentality. And if archaeologists of the future were to come across these 178 statues, assuming I did get that number right, they would say, oh, these people who lived in this place, which they called Rome, had 178 gods. I mean, that's what you'd assume, wouldn't you, if you found these, because it looks like they're being honored as gods, but they're not. Catholics call these people saints. And so that's how easy it is to misinterpret remains of stone statues. And therefore, I would suggest that when we look at the Egyptian gods, we don't realize what was in the minds of the priests, that these were not necessarily personalities, divine personalities, so much as aspects of a grander cosmic consciousness, which they conceived of as Ma'at. There's a very interesting Egyptologist who actually lives in Israel called Vincent Tobin. He's a Russian Jewish chap I've corresponded with. He's published some fascinating stuff, and he maintains that despite all the evidence, that the ancient Egyptians were ultimately monotheists. And in a way, they certainly were. And he has a lot of very profound arguments to make this point, along the lines of what I've just said. And Ma'at, as the cosmic principle of cosmic order, which is the sort of thing that most of us over the past 2 days have been talking about, really, and I'm sure you will all agree with this, is what they're on about, really. And so that's what they were on about. They were honoring it by the strange structures they built and their ceremonies and rituals. They were attempting to be in harmony and resonance with it because they believed the cosmos to be divine, but it was divine rectitude, and they wanted to be in the same resonant spectrum, as it were. And I think we would all agree on that's what it was really all about. That's what we ought to get back to. That's what we should be up to. What do you think, Semir?
Oh, sorry. Well, I think it's a bit more than that. They didn't just build things because they like the look of them. I think they built things because they were useful. I think they built things in the places. They chose the places very specifically. They understood how to interact between cosmic and Earth, and they placed their structures in very specific places and then they built them in very specific ways in order to concentrate the energies, in order to focus them. And then things like pyramids, I think they use the giant acupuncture points on the Earth in a kind of geomantic sense. And they could also use those for healing, as in terms of these waters or whatever, and they could use them for these out-of-body experiences as shaman. So I think it's a bit more than just honouring and a bit more than just saying, cosmic order. They exploited certain things very deliberately for benign purposes, and I think that's really what we need to. And they did it because they could. I mean, they had the techniques for moving stuff. And we can focus on that, but it's the purpose, and as you were saying, what were they up to? And that was why they did it, because they knew how to exploit these energies.
I'd like to answer the question slightly differently, actually, but because being at the end of the queue, they've already said everything I wanted to say. I drew the short straw here, but I'd like to make the point. What is the point of finding out what the pyramids mean? What is the point of finding out what the crop circles mean? And all this sort of thing, in other words, knowledge for knowledge's sake, is it really worth anything? What is the point of finding out all this stuff when the last tree is being cut down, or as the last iceberg splashes into the sea? So I think the bottom line for all the research that we're all doing and other people should be looking to the future. And knowledge for knowledge's sake, just for writing books or whatever, is not an option now. And I've been saying for years, that the ancients lived with this harmony with nature, and that's the lesson, I think, when they only took what they needed. And I think that's, to me, is the bottom line of all this research, is to use it for a better future, because I've been saying for years, we are not fighting to save the planet. The planet can take care of herself. What we're fighting for is whether we're going to be along for the rest of the ride. And I hope we are. And I think the ancients can teach us. All the information is in the ancient science. It's already there. Everything we need to survive is there for us to use today, I believe.
I think I'm probably a little bit more reductionist about this. I find it a little bit difficult sometimes when people talk about energy, because I'm an engineer, and if I'm talking about energy, I need to know what the energy is, where the energy comes from. And my research centres, I'm not saying that it isn't so, not by any means, but my research centres on, as much as I can, the people involved. And I think we know certain things, particularly the ancient people in our own country, in our own environment. They were farmers. They hadn't been farmers an awful long time, but they were farmers. They probably had a very strong clan structure. They certainly had a fairly good environment at the time that the megalithic structures were being built. They had a fair amount of time on their hands, which as hunter-gatherers they hadn't had, because hunter-gathering involves working hard all the time. Farming implies there are parts of the year when there's time free. They were certainly people who were every bit as bright as we are, and we know from the structures that they created that they were fantastic engineers. And although everything that's been said may well be true, I think what we have to say most about them is they weren't so different from us. They were curious. They wanted to know the way the world worked. They appear to have had information which was incredible, but I think most of all, they were people, like us.
In order to answer your question, a couple of 3 examples. I show you that ceramic sculpture, ceramic block, 8 tons. We measured the radiation. He mentioned gamma and beta. And if 1 is allowed average, what we measured was 0.05 to 0.18 microsievert per hour. That's way below the damaging radiation. But it went from 0.05 to 0.18, came back to 0.5, and like a sinusoid. And that is producing the magnetic fields. They knew the magnetic fields. Example number 2. Last year we moved one of our blocks. It was like 300 kilo block with some type of runic writings, because in that area the tunnels were rather narrow. So we moved it about 2 meters so nobody can damage it, while cleaning the tunnels. The moment we moved that block, the water started coming from underground, and that sections was kind of flooded from that point on. In other words, they knew where to locate and how to position the blocks. Example number 3. We do not find any animals' bones in the underground labyrinth. When we were measuring the electromagnetism, and on the side tunnels, we always measure 28 kilohertz. That's something that we cannot hear, but that's something that the animals can hear. In other words, it seems that they purposely made that frequency so they can keep the animals and the bugs out. And finally, the energy beam that I mentioned, that's something that is measurable. Now, let me elaborate a little bit. If you have an energy beam coming from the center of the pyramid and the strength intensified as it moves away from the pyramid, so if the source is in the pyramid and the strength intensified, it means that we can reach any point in the universe. For example, the 5th planet in some solar system, in star system Taurus. So when you have that energy beam reaching another planet, you form the energy bridge. When you have the energy bridge, then you can move the frequencies, the information, objects, beings.
What was the meaning, Semir, of the strange sound that you transformed to 8 hertz?
Well, 28 kilohertz we cannot hear. We can hear up to 20 kilohertz. Actually, the kids can. As we get older, like you and I, we can hear up to 16 kilohertz. Now, what we wanted to hear is how that sound, would, sound when we listen. So we converted it to 8 kilohertz. So we were able to see it. Now, today I did not have time, but we were further refining that sound. So as we were refining it, it sounded more like, some type of the sounds produced by beings. I did not have time this time. Maybe in 3 years, I'll be able to tell you more.
That's great. Well, I think we've run out of time, everyone, for any more questions. So anyone got any more questions, please contact the speakers directly or nab them quickly outside. A round of applause, please, for our panel.